Hello, everyone. I'm Billie, and this is Show and Tell. Every few episodes or so, I try and bring you a guest from some other part of the world. And today, you're in luck because I have a guest, and I will be right back with her. Okay, so today, my guest is Laurence, and I don't know very much about her except that she's lived in Taiwan and she lives in the UK now, but she's
Mhm.
clearly a vintage knitting lover. And I think she has some other areas of expertise. So, Lawrence, why don't you tell us about yourself? I know there's a PhD looming in the
Yes.
distance. Yeah, so why don't
Yes.
you talk
hmm
about that and then, we'll get into your interest in vintage.
Yeah. Yeah. So my name is Laurence Wen-Yu Li. So my Chinese name is Li Wen-Yu. And I am doing a PhD here in the UK at the Royal College of Art and the Victoria and Albert Museum on the subject of 19th century Chinese fashion, in particular ribbons. So I'm looking at white ribbons that, well, I've got, I should have one here. Yeah. I'm looking at ribbons that look like this. So the white ribbons with pictures on them. And I'm trying to figure out, they were introduced to China in the middle of the 19th century, and they became very, very popular. So China started producing their own and they started selling it back to Europe. So there's a bit of back and forth in this time period. And I'm also trying to figure out how women viewed these ribbons as an expression of fashion because they change pretty frequently. And you can see similar designs across many different places, which hints at them being mass produced, or at least the patterns for them being kind of disseminated widely across like the region. So
So
that's the PhD part.
they started out being
Mhm.
stitched by hand and then they went to machine made.
Well, they were woven on a machine, and it depends on the kind of machine. It could be hand powered, so it could be just a hand loom, or they could be steam powered. So I've seen a few examples in the UK, such as in Coventry, where they have this huge steam loom that weaves 12 ribbons at once. But there's also small looms that just weaves one and you just use your hands to do it. So they are woven, but they're not embroidered, although they do look like they are embroidered sometimes.
Have you ever tried to do it on the loom?
I've tried a bit of weaving, but not on a ribbon loom specifically. And I don't love weaving because it takes, I don't know, it's probably quicker than knitting, but it's not very relaxing because you have to count a lot of stuff and the threads are very thin.
And it's
Yeah.
silk thread?
Yes, it's silk thread for this period. They may have, cotton, linen, ramie, or some plant fibers, but it's predominantly silk.
Oh, it must be so beautiful in person.
They are, yeah. Yeah, there's a couple of them. You can see these ribbons used on Chinese garments from maybe the middle of the 19th century all the way up until the 1910s, 1920s, and you can see them everywhere. So the ones in the V&A has a Asia gallery where they have a China section, and they've got a few garments displayed there, and they've got ribbons similar to this on the garments that you can see. So
Well, I
if you
live in New
visit
York. I live in
V&A,
New York, so
yeah,
the Metropolitan Museum certainly has Chinese
yeah.
garments,
I know
and
the Met has them. Yeah, the Met has got a good number of those.
they're always so dazzling. It's hard to focus on like one little segment. But now that
Yeah.
I know you, I will definitely be looking for the ribbon on the garments. I mean, I have
Yeah.
Hanging background. It's not Chinese, Japanese.
Japanese, yeah.
Also. And I wanted to show you, I mean, I know this is veering away from knitting, but I
Yeah.
wanted to show you, I had family members at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century who were living in first Nagasaki and then Shanghai. This is
Oh.
not from them, but
hmm
I'll share my screen and I'll show you
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
two pictures that I think will
hmm
maybe delight you and hopefully yours. All right, 1 second. This is like a technical feat.
Yeah. Like the garments in the at the end of the Qing dynasty, they started becoming very, very elaborate. So they've got lots,
Oh,
maybe
no.
why you haven't noticed the ribbons before, because they're just immersed in all those decorations. Oh, that's lovely. This is a photo of your relative.
Yes.
Oh wow, that's so nice that you have that.
Let me show you the full length of it.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I can see it.
And then I have one more. Let me see if I can also bring that up. she's
Hmm.
not in a kimono in this one, but it's of the period. It's
Yeah.
around 1920-ish, I think. You
Mm.
probably know the period better than I do.
I've got a similar hairdo. Like I can't do it over my ears. I keep poking myself with a pin, but I know in the 1920s they had this kind of double bun as well.
But the shoes, I think, really date it maybe to the 20s, as well
Mm.
as everything else. So yeah, I
Yeah.
just thought I'd share those.
Yeah, I haven't seen the second picture yet. I only saw the kimono one.
Oh,
You- Yeah.
oh,
Could you
okay.
show that
Then
again?
I didn't do it right then. Okay. Okay. Thanks for letting me know. Sorry. So yeah, I mean,
Oh, I see that. Oh, yeah, that's nice. I think this may be 1910s, maybe at the tail end of the 1910s.
it
It's
could
very
be because they were
Edwardian. Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
They were there.
I
And
love that they colored the hat though. There's just got a little bit of color on it.
right, it's hand tinted.
Yeah.
And to have the flower be like that,
Mm.
like you can see her skin, it's
Yeah,
more like, black and white photo. So I
it
know
is.
hand colored. There,
Oh, that's
there
lovely.
was one that was printed on silk, but
Hmm.
my cousin who owned it donated it to a museum. Um,
Oh, oh
so
well.
I don't have that one. Anyway, okay, let's talk about what we came here to talk. How did you get into vintage knitting? What was your interest? Because you're interested
Yeah.
in something else,
Yeah,
maybe.
I actually started out sewing vintage clothes before I started doing the traditional Chinese stuff because that was just what was most readily available on the internet. So I started learning how to sew maybe 2017. And pretty quickly I was like, I'm not a fan of these modern patterns. They are so boring. And I started seeing, vintage people in blogs. There were a lot of blogs at the time, like writing blogs of how they were, maybe buying vintage, how they were making vintage inspired stuff. So I started learning how to make dresses and I got really into like maybe 1950s vintage from maybe 2017 to 2019 and I bought a few dresses. And after that, I started going back in time and making more historical stuff. So I've made a little bit of like 18th century, European stuff. I've made stays and I've done some like Victorian stuff, like I've done shirt waists and done, walking skirts, that kind of thing. But then I was like, I want to do a degree in this. This is really interesting. So I applied to the clothing and textiles master's degree in Taiwan in Furen Catholic University. And when I applied, I was thinking that I wanted to study Western fashion history because, that's just what's available. But after I got in, they told me that, oh, we have a museum in our department that's called the Chinese Textiles and Clothing Culture Center, and that we've got tons of 19th and 20th century Chinese and Taiwanese dress. So I started studying those instead because, I had access to them now. And we had, good relationships with a few collectors who bring the stuff to show us. So I could, like, actually look at the garments, see what materials they were made from, see the details of how they were made. Sometimes there's pockets inside, that kind of thing. So I decided to do my master's thesis on late Qing Dynasty Chinese dress. And the reason for doing it in this period is because I haven't seen a lot of representation for it before. Because I don't know if you're aware, but there's currently a kind of movement of Hanfu. So that's traditional clothing of the Han Chinese. They're starting to revive that. But Hanfu doesn't cover all time periods of Chinese history because it refers to clothing of the Han. So the Qing dynasty, which is from 1644 to 1911, they were ruled by the Manchu, who were an ethnic minority in China. So a lot of Chinese people, Taiwanese people also, they don't consider it Han. So people are not as interested in studying it. But there's also a lot more information on it just because it's closer to the present day, because it's
Mhm.
easier to get information from 19th century than from, 13th century or whatever. So that's what I decided to do. And for my master's, I did a recreation of the Leiqing ensemble. So that took me to do a PhD here because we didn't have clothing PhDs in Taiwan. So I went and found a program here and I applied. I got in. So now I'm in the UK. And once I got here, I was like, I should learn knitting because I know that British people love knitting. And
Wait, wait,
I
wait.
saw,
I want to interrupt you because you're going so fast and like I have
sorry.
questions along the way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What did you study as an undergraduate? What was your major?
Uh-huh. It was unrelated. Yeah, I studied plant pathology and microbiology in undergrad, which is like completely unrelated.
So you're very good at research.
I would say so. It's my job
Yes,
now.
has to
Yeah,
be
yeah, it's
because
my
you're
job.
looking at archives and so forth.
Yeah.
I also wanted to find out when you started sewing from
Mm,
vintage patterns, where
yeah.
were you getting these patterns? Out of books?
Oh, both. So I did buy a few vintage patterns from European sellers. So the 1950s patterns that came on the tissue paper in an envelope. So I bought a few of those. But I also learned to draft patterns from, pattern making manuals. So I mostly learned from a modern one, but I also found some pattern making manuals from the 1940s and 50s, and they give very nice examples of the styles that were popular at the time. So that's how I taught myself to kind of draft patterns and sew garments. And it's pretty transferable, sewing this kind of garment to sewing other kinds of garments from different time periods. But yeah, I look at a lot of books.
And I'm sure it's very helpful in your knitting too to have
Mhm.
that sewing background and the pattern making
Yeah,
background. So,
yeah, definitely.
what caused you to segue away from
Mhm.
sewing into
Yeah.
knitting?
Well, I do still want to sew sometimes, but what caused me to segue into knitting was because the commute was just taking so long. I wanted to have something to do on the commute. And
Yes,
yeah, yeah,
yes,
that's
dear
that's the main reason.
viewers, you can take your knitting with you everywhere,
Yes,
trains, planes,
yes.
automobiles. Oh, good, good.
Yeah,
And
and when I moved to the UK, I saw people knitting on the train. I was like, I must get on this. This is fantastic.
it's
Yeah.
rare here to see people knitting publicly.
Hmm.
Um,
Mm.
almost never do I
It's
see,
not it's
although
not the most common, but I've seen at least a few people knitting in the wild.
sometimes when people see me knitting, they say to
Yeah.
me, "Oh, I knit," but like they haven't thought to bring their knitting with them. They're probably not
Mm.
as serious as I am. I know it goes on, but I can just imagine in the
Yeah.
UK because there's such a long-standing tradition of knitting. I don't think it ever really
Mhm.
died out. Like here, it
Yeah.
really dipped, and now it's having
Hmm.
a comeback.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. Because I actually learned from a local knitting group. So I saw that they were posting in the local Facebook group that we have a knitting and crochet group every 2 weeks. We're happy to teach newcomers. So I went and they taught me how to knit.
And what style of knitting is it? Is it English? You
English.
holding
And
it
the
on
the yeah,
with
the
your
the
right
woman
hand?
who taught me, the lady who taught me, she actually knit lever style. So she had these long needles that she put under her armpits. And I've still got a pair, but I don't use them because they're just so heavy. So she used the long needles and just put the left one under the armpit and move with the right one. So that was what she taught me.
That's the super fast way. So if you
Yeah.
are able to knit like that, you can really go fast.
Yeah.
I've seen people do it and it's like
Hmm.
it's like a different world from how
It
I
is. But I didn't really get on with it. So I ended up, doing circulars like everyone else.
well, it's
It's
easier
easier to
in
take on the train.
right
Yeah.
in public. You're not, jabbing people with another
Stabbing the
long
guy next to me on
needle.
the train.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And maybe it's more like acceptable. People see that long thing. I mean, I'm able
Yeah.
to carry my knitting in and out of places that have security. Nobody
Mm.
touches them because the tips are little, and especially if I'm
Yeah.
with a wooden needle,
Mm.
they don't
Yeah,
care.
I also fly back home to Taiwan regularly, so it's like a 12, 14 hour flight. So that's why I also want to, bring my knitting on there. And thankfully I've been really lucky. They haven't had any issue with my needles either.
Oh, good, good. I mean, that seems to be the international consensus that I've heard. Most people have not had trouble.
Yeah.
Occasionally I hear, their needles were confiscated.
Yeah, but I do bring like the bamboo ones on the flight if possible.
My philosophy is a pen, a ballpoint pen or a pencil
Hmm.
is just as dangerous, maybe more so because it has a smaller point.
Yeah, sharper tip. Yeah, definitely. I'm not knitting with like, 1 millimeter needles, so
Oh, you're not? Why
no.
not? It's such a vintage thing to do. I
Yeah,
think
I
that's
I've
what
seen those in action, and it's like knitting with like pencil leads. It's so tiny.
Yeah, this wasn't as small as that. I think this was maybe a size
Mhm.
2 US, so I think that's
Mm.
2.25 millimeters.
Mm.
Anyway, so
Yeah.
now you're knitting from vintage patterns, like
Yes.
the one that you're wearing.
Yeah.
Where are you finding these patterns? I'm sure people want to know that.
Mhm. I'm finding them online. So I know a lot of there's a lot of Etsy sellers who sell scans that they have, and there's also some free options. So one of my sweaters that I'll show later is from an Australian trove pattern, I think. I think it was an Australian newspaper, and they've digitized everything and it's online. You can get it there. And I know the British Library also has a good collection of, vintage knitting patterns. And some people that have been fortunate enough to go in and take pictures, they've put it up on their blogs, so you can find it there as well. And I've also got some of Susan Crawford's books, because
Mhm.
she's resized everything. That's really convenient to read. And I have found a few, vintage patterns out in the wild before here. So this is a men's pattern, and I think these are maybe 60s, maybe more 50s, more 60s. I haven't found the older ones yet, but they're around in charity shops and some places here. And they're not terribly expensive. This was 50p, for one. Yeah, so I've got a few of these as well.
I never see them in New York. And there's
Oh,
a charity shop near me that's called Vintage. And
yeah.
I've seen wool a little bit. I've seen sewing patterns, but I've yet to see any vintage knitting patterns. Anyway, so
Interesting.
let's start to talk about what you're wearing and what's on the
Yes.
mannequin. And it sounds like there's other things you're going to show us too.
Yeah.
The wool that you're using, is it always British wool because it's accessible or not necessarily?
Yeah, I do try to use a lot of British wool. So the one I'm wearing now is from the yarn is from Susan Crawford as well. So it's her Fenella 2-ply yarn I think that's supposed to mimic 3-ply vintage yarn. So it looks like this.
And do you like the yarn? I've never knit with it.
Hmm. It's pretty good, but it's a bit more rustic than superwash yarn because it's non-superwash. And before this, I had only used superwash yarn. So this is one of my first sweaters. It's made from drops. So the drops baby merino, and it's super wash, so it behaves a lot differently. So when you wash it, it does stretch out, and I put it into the dryer so to get it to shrink back. And I don't enjoy that because if yeah, the
It's
face you
air.
made, I don't enjoy that. So I started looking for non-superwash yarn. So the good thing is that this stays the same size. So I always do a swatch and I'll wash the swatch and I dry the swatch and it just stays the same size throughout. So that's really nice. And another thing is that because the yarns are a bit more grippy, so you kind of get a slightly looser fabric. So this and this, they are both 7 stitches per inch, but this yarn is a lot thinner, so that is a lot more holey. So it's a lot cooler to wear in, hotter weather than the
And
drops one is.
drapier.
Hmm? Yes, and a
Drapier.
drapier as well. So it does feel very vintage because I've like handled a few vintage sweaters before, in the vintage shows, and it does feel like the vintage sweaters. It's very light. So it's maybe I think it only took maybe half the yardage to make this, not half the yardage, half the weight. So I've been calculating a new version of the COA. So this one is from Drops, is one of the first one I made. And I'm doing a new version in Susan Crawford yarn. So it's the same yarn as this. And by my calculations, it's only going to take half the amount of weight of the yarn. So this took maybe 330 grams, and this version will only take 180 grams, but it's the same
How
size, but
interesting.
it's just a bit more holy. You
Hmm.
you can kind of see more through it than the superwash. I think I've got a swatch here, yeah. So this is the like the drops one. You can't see as much through it. But
Right.
they
Right.
are
It
they're
does
the
look
same gauge,
stiffer.
yeah. Yeah, they come out to the same gauge, but because the yarn is thinner and it kind of holds itself apart with the, grip on the scales and anything. So it's much cooler, so that's nice.
That is such an incredibly useful piece of information. Really, of
Yeah.
all the people who have been on this podcast, no one has ever done that comparison of same pattern in
Yeah.
superwash and in
Mhm.
wool.
Yeah, non-superwash. Yeah, because it was a bit frustrating when I first bought this yarn because I was intending to make another sweater in a smaller gauge. So the yarn on the package it said you could knit it maybe down to 34 or 36 stitches per 4 inches, but I could only get it down to maybe 30. I couldn't get it down any tighter. And I think it's just because the fabric holds onto itself, the yarn holds onto itself, you can't squeeze down. But because the superwash is so slippery, then you can make it very thick and like on the same grid, it's just filling up more of the grid, even
Hmm.
though it's the same number of stitches per inch. Yeah.
Okay, so I love both of these patterns that you're showing. I love things that are two-tone. It just
Yeah.
it just reeks of vintage.
Yeah, yeah. I love color block stuff, like obviously.
Well, I mean, yeah, I guess it's color block because you have
Yeah.
one, but it's also
Mm-hmm.
that, twisting of them.
Mm-hmm.
Was that very hard to do? It looks complicated.
For this one
The
or
cable
for
part.
this one. It's not really hard. You just it's a bit like in Tarja. So you have one ball for the red and one ball for the white, and you just carry the red across half of the cable, and then you knit the red part, and then you carry the white part across. So it's a little bit color work, but I haven't actually done any stranded color work yet. So this is not very difficult to do, I'm sure. Like I've tried to do a little color work here, but because I can't knit both English and continental style, I'm trying to learn to do like color work with both hands, but haven't got time yet.
Oh, there's a great video. I think it's Suzanne Bryan
Oh,
who has a video on how to hold the yarn in both hands.
yeah.
And I use her technique. I learned it from her. It's really
Oh,
because I
fantastic.
have done color work.
Mm. Yep,
And
I've noted it down.
I've done color work on the front as well as on the back. I've done some
Mm.
things where I'm steeking, but I've
Yeah,
done things where I'm knitting
flat.
flat back and forth.
Oh,
And
oh wow.
she has, both ways of carrying the yarn. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
she's a really great resource.
Yeah, I'll look that up. Yeah. Yeah, so it's not terribly hard to do, I'm sure. You don't really need any color experience. If you have color experience, I'm sure it'll be a bit faster just because of the yarn management, but no, it's doable.
So it's knit flat? Like
Yes,
how would
flat in pieces. So the front is one piece, the back is another piece, and the sleeves are all one piece each.
it looks really, really nifty. I think it would be a lot of fun. I'm not much of a cable person, but
Hmm.
for that, it might be worth doing it. It's so good
Definitely.
looking.
Yeah, I thought it was just going to be color work when I first saw the pattern, and then I read it and I'm like, oh, it's cables. That's so cool. I must do this. And also, I do love cables. I've done a lot of cables.
And I also think the yarn you've used helps it to lie down flat. I bet the
Hmm.
stiffer superwash would make it bulkier there, and I think that would be
Yeah.
less attractive. I like that it's kind of
Mm.
sleek.
Yeah, thank you.
It's
It does
really
feel a
good.
bit sporty to me. Like when I've tried it on, I was like, this looks a bit like a baseball jersey, but oh well.
No, but maybe somebody was playing tennis in there. When you
Yeah.
wear this out publicly, do you get compliments on it?
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah,
I've
so
got more
striking.
compliments on this one. So when I was at the V&A, because I've got, we've got offices there. Like I did get stopped by a visitor. She's like, "Could I take a picture with with your sweater?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah, but the V&A is like a subset of the population. The people
Yeah,
who are there are very,
like, into the arts,
yeah,
obviously.
art
Yeah.
driven. They're focused on fashion and maybe, color
Mhm.
combinations. But I just meant like
Yeah.
walking on the street. I have one sweater
Mm.
that when I'm wearing it on the street,
Yeah.
strangers stop me to say, wow, cool
Oh.
sweater. So I would think that
Mhm.
the sweater you're wearing would garner that kind
Mhm.
of attention because whenever things are color black like that so
Yeah.
boldly, it's
Hmm.
so different from contemporary fashion that it really
Yeah.
catches the eye. I
Yeah, that's
I
true.
like it a lot. I personally
Thank
like it
you.
better than the other one. Although I
Oh,
think
thank you.
the other one is very
Mhm.
unusual and
Yeah,
I
it's a
can
bit more
see
well, this one's a bit more well known. I've seen more people make this, but I
yes.
haven't seen anyone make this one yet. So I was like, yeah, I'm gonna wear this.
Good, good, good. Okay, so let's talk about this one. I call it the mermaid because it has those
Yeah.
little curls at
Yeah.
the top like ocean waves.
Yes, the pattern is actually called Sea Waves. So
Ah,
on the original 1940s pattern, it's just called Sea Waves. So yeah, and I've made it in very nautical colors. And it's really fun because it's knit. You actually knit the stripes this way, and then you add the rib, or you kind of knit it together with the rib. So you don't have to do any fancy color work, it's just stripes. And the thing is that these are just cast on. You cast on an additional 20 stitches and knit 4 rows and cast it off, and then you have to sew it into the swirls. So it's actually not a terribly difficult pattern, and I was able to attempt this when I had just been knitting for 3 months maybe.
wow. And it looks so complicated, but
Yeah,
you're
it looks very
describing
complicated, but
it
it's
as like
not.
not. Wow.
Yeah, I've got a blog post on my blog. I'll send it over to you that details the making process of this one and how you can, I don't know, kind of adjust it if you want. You can add a few stripes in the middle, or you can add a few stripes down here if you need to change the size. Yeah.
Well, I love that the ribbing is put on afterwards because then you can decide post facto how long you want your ribbing to be.
Yeah. Well, on the original pattern, they ask you to knit it first, but when I've looked on Ravelry and see the other people making this, they just sew the stripes part and then they pick up and they knit the ribbing. And it sounds like a lot more sensible way to do it.
Why, what did you do? That's not what you did?
I followed the pattern originally, but for my second one, I'll pick it up and knit. But for this one, I knit the ribbing first, and then I knit this one, then I knit it together with the ribbing on every row.
Oh, mm.
Yeah, so that was a bit less fun, but I put them on the same needle. So I just put them on the same circular needle. So it wasn't that bad. It didn't flop around too bad. But next time I do it, I'll just be picking up and knitting.
I think, and especially because you can decide, do I want it to be
Mhm.
6 inches or 4 inches or
Yeah.
3 inches?
Yeah.
You
Except
can
that
try
this
it
one's a little
on.
bit long for me because I'm pretty short. So I followed the pattern exactly and it turned out a bit long. So for my second one, I'm gonna be shortening it a bit. Yeah.
And you can't rip this out because of the
I
way
yeah.
you've done
Yeah,
it.
because I cast on here. I started the ribbing here and then yeah, so I
Yeah.
can't rip this one out. But no, it's fine. Yeah. Still looks okay. It looks more modern because it's a bit longer, I think. I feel like the vintage jumpers they are a bit more cropped. Yeah.
They still have deep ribbing sometimes, though.
Yeah.
4 inches is kind of typical,
Mm.
sometimes even deeper. That looks
Yeah.
deeper yet.
Yeah,
Wow.
the ribbing took a long time. I did most of it on the plane.
Who loves ribbing?
No, yeah, me neither. Just so much ribbing. It's interminable.
And it's usually on a smaller needle, so
Yes.
it's
Yes.
even more
Yeah.
exaggerated.
Yeah, I think most of the stuff I've made are on very small needles, like 2.75, 3.25 millimeter, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, I think vintage, I think that's a standard, like a vintage gauge.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, look, what else do you have?
Yeah, let me show the next one. I figure we just dress it up as we go. So this is the most recent one I finished. It's a 1930s pattern. And it's got loads of cables.
So you like knitting cables, do you?
Well, maybe not now, like I've done too many already, but it was fun. I do have like I like the effect of cables more than the process, but
Mm.
yeah, so it's a 1930s pattern and it was supposed to be the original pattern is a dress, but I didn't want to do the skirt. So I added, 3 inches, 3.5 inches of ribbing, and now it's a top. And I like the effect of the cables kind of graduating and becoming thinner at the end at the top, but they are just all done the same width, and then you gather the very top. So it's also not a terribly difficult knit either. And I made this up from a British yarn called Debonair Yarns, I think. And it's a 55% blue face luster and 45% silk. So it's pretty cool to wear. It's pretty good for the weather we're currently having. Like we're in a bit of a heat wave, yeah.
The
And
color
the back
is
is, yeah.
just, the color is luscious.
Thank you. Yeah, it's
Like
a very
berries.
raspberry kind of color. Yeah, and because I think because of the silk, it gives it a little bit more drape than the other 100% wool garments. And it's also got a bit of luster from both the BFL and the silk, so I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never knit with BFL.
Yeah.
I don't see it
Hmm.
so much in the yarn shops here.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's maybe just a British sheep. And I went and looked it up, and I think they're mostly bred for their meat, so they weren't intended to be like yarn sheep in the first place.
Oh, but
Yeah.
people do knit with it.
Yeah.
I've seen it at Rhinebeck. There are people who are selling it.
Mhm.
I just haven't tinkered with it yet. One day maybe.
It's lovely. Like it's got a bit of a sheen that's really nice. Yeah.
And what size needle? Same as,
Yeah, same as all of the others. I think it's 3.25 for the body, 2.75 for the rib. It's I think it's a gauge of 7 or 7.5 stitches per inch, something like that.
people comment on how courageous Lawrence is. It's work. It's work.
Yeah, I think this took me maybe 60 hours. I think on average it takes me maybe 60 hours to make a short sleeve.
Oh, so you're fast. You're a fast knitter. Because
Yeah,
I'm sure that would take me more than 60 hours. Maybe
I've also got, lucky that I'm short, so I usually shorten the patterns. I can shorten them by, maybe an inch between the armhole and the waist. So I don't have to add length or anything, so it makes it a bit quicker.
I'm sure too.
Yeah.
And I,
I've got a knitting friend who's like 6 foot and she has length and everything.
oh, poor thing.
Yeah.
Poor thing. I mean, the great thing, since we haven't mentioned it, the great thing about knitting vintage is if you are 6'2" or you
Yeah.
are 5 feet and maybe
Hmm.
vintage things aren't your size, you can
Hmm.
knit to whatever size you
Yes.
need.
Yes,
So,
that's why I
you
really
know,
got into like making my own garments, either sewing or knitting, just so customizable.
you look like you're pretty slim though, so probably clothing from the period fits you. I don't have a
Yeah.
26-inch
Yeah,
waist.
for now. There's still time left. Yeah, I'm pretty lucky that a lot of the vintage patterns that are 32 or 34-inch bust, and I can kind of fit into those. Sometimes I even have to make them a bit smaller if I find something that's maybe 36-inch bust.
Oh,
So
so you're so
yeah.
lucky because the patterns are written in
Yeah.
sizes. No,
Yeah, I'm like, oh, I
sizes.
found out I'm even shorter than they were in the 50s, which is a bit, I know. Yeah.
Short is no problem.
Yeah, it's easy to change.
Bust, hips, shoulders, those could be problems that are harder to adapt the pattern.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you're,
and I also do find that a lot of vintage patterns, they've got really, really short arm size, like armholes. So sometimes I do have to lengthen it by maybe half an inch or an inch. Like the distance between here and here is just so short.
so when you do that,
Hmm.
how are you adjusting the sleeve cap to fit into the new size arm size?
I think I will. For this one, I think I cast on a few extra stitches at the start, and I kept them when I did the decreases. So the end, was maybe 10 stitches wider or something. Or sometimes I will add height to the sleeve cap. So I've got one here I can show. So this is my current work in progress. It's the 1930s jacket sleeve. Like it's a huge sleeve, but because I measured the pattern, I was like, that's the armhole is too small. So I added maybe an inch here. I made it taller, so I've got extra length here and here to fit with the extra length here.
How do you decide whether you want to make it taller or wider?
I will compare it to garments I already have. So I'll measure like a cardigan that already fits and see how long it is around the sleeve cap. And if it's a lot narrower, I'll add to the sleeve cap. And then I will measure how tall it is. And if it's short, I'll add to the length. So it depends. Yeah.
Okay, this is where you separate the men from the boys. See, the people who are working on PhDs have that kind of, strategic thinking. Just
Yeah.
brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. Because I'm only master's, no PhD.
I haven't graduated yet. I've got a master's
Here.
currently.
But that's something that I personally struggle with, and I bet a lot of other people do too.
Mm,
That, I need more, actually more around here because I have
Mm.
a heavier arm. So
Yeah.
you could achieve it either way. It's true. And I never know. And
Hmm.
then getting it to fit into the arm side, even if I change the arm side,
Hmm.
there's a lot that happens up here because
Yeah, it
shoulder
is.
width determines stuff too. So
Mm.
this area is for me like always the most complicated, but that's a very scientific approach. Thank you for that. That's like a
Yeah.
huge tip.
Yeah, I
Wow.
think my sewing experience does help because I've sewn a fair few amount of sleeves. So I kind of can look at it and say like, it looks suspiciously, narrow, or it looks suspiciously short. And then I would check it against something that I have. Or sometimes I'll check it on my mannequin because I've actually got an arm, but I've taken it off because it's harder. Yeah, like, but I've got an arm for the mannequin. I can, measure it around as
Did
well.
you make the arm or the arm is part of
No,
it?
it came with the mannequin, but it's detachable.
So can you change the width of the arm, the shape of the arm to match your own? Can you
You
like
could,
hack it?
but yeah, but if you buy it, then it comes like this, and I'll measure my own and see how different it is. And currently, there's not a huge difference, so I can go with it. Yeah,
Oh,
but
so
otherwise, I think just measuring a garment you already own is probably the quickest part because you can just lay it out and see, okay, how wide is this, how tall is this, and then you can see what's the difference.
I've tried that, but different yarns are behaving differently. So if the thing that I'm measuring it to is like a store-bought sweater that I like, that
Hmm.
yarn's knit at a really different gauge and has like different
Yeah.
properties to it. So,
Hmm.
I'm
You have
still,
to, yeah, you have to recalculate the gauge. You just, I'll measure it's like a 20 centimeters and then apply it to my gauge. So if my gauge is 7 stitches per inch, then that would be, 7 times 8, 56. So you have to readjust it as you go. Yeah, but I think it's a good benchmark to see how you should do the adjustments because yeah, I think the armholes are a big problem that people have with vintage knitting. I've spoken about this to a few of my friends who also knit vintage stuff. She's like, yeah, always have to add, to the armhole. Yeah.
yeah, we just want the comfort of being able to move.
Yeah.
They were just
But
going
like
to
this one, this one
cocktail
has got a
party.
bit of a tight armhole. If I were to make it again, I would add a bit. Like
I
it
think
fits, it fits a little bit too well.
I think they spent all of their time just standing around and maybe like, drinking at a cocktail party.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
like I don't exercise. I don't really exercise. Like I don't have any biceps. Like what were they doing back then? Yeah.
okay, how many others do you have?
Yeah, I've got three jumpers and a few accessories. So
Okay.
yeah, let me show you
This
this
is so
one.
much fun. I mean, I hope you're enjoying
It's very
sharing.
fun. I love showing people stuff. Not everyone wants to hear about the nerdy knitting stuff that I'm really into. So this one, as you can probably tell, is 1950s cardigan with dolman sleeves. Can you see it? Yeah.
It's adorable.
Yeah, and this one is also full of cables. So the both these fronts they're just full of cables. And I think I've done enough cables by now. Like after this one and the pink one. And I actually I shortened this one a bit. I think I shortened it by 1 inch here around the waist here. But and it's supposed to be 3/4 length sleeve, so that hits pretty nicely. And I probably should do more cardigans because I do wear cardigans a lot, but they take so long to knit. So I've only made this one.
I also like cardigans and find I don't knit them enough.
Yeah.
I'm working on one now if I could ever get through it.
Yeah, I need to find more cute cardigan patterns.
Well,
Yeah.
the one that I'm working on you might like. It's the Tyrolean s-
Oh yeah, I've seen some
with
of
the
those. Yeah.
four flowers
Hmm.
going down. It's a pretty easy construction and
Hmm.
there's no design on the back. It's just plain and has a little top
Yeah.
stitching. Oh,
Yeah, mine is plain at the back as well. So at least no cables at the back. It's just
yeah,
plain.
that's a relief, huh?
Yeah. But it is a little bit shorter than my sea waves. So when I wear it together, it's slightly shorter on top, but well.
This kind of reminds me of the Dior new look with
It
a
does. Yeah.
little Peter Pan kind of collar and the dolman sleeve. I think
Yeah.
it's really adorable pattern. I like it.
Thank you. Yeah, this is the one I got from the Australian newspaper called Trove. So I think it's for free. I'll give you the link later. Yeah. And it also came with a skirt, which I didn't make. I'm like, I'm just gonna wear with one of my normal woven skirts.
I'd love to see the cables up
Yeah, let me take it off
close.
and show it closer. The cables are really small, and there's no pearls, so they're all knits. They're all on the knitted side, so they're not the most three-dimensional cables, but you do have a bit of texture going on here.
They're so different. Oh, I can't wait to see that pattern.
Yeah,
I love it. Love it.
thank you.
You just need a little strand of pearls and you're all set.
Oh yeah, I need some pearls for this, definitely. Yeah, and this one is from the 1930s. Yeah, I think I've been gravitating a bit more towards the 30s because they've just got the most interesting patterns.
Well, I remember seeing this on your Instagram page. So
Yes.
tell the people how they can find you on Instagram.
Yes, my Instagram handle is my name, so that's Laurence Wen-Yu Li, all in one word. LaurenceWenYuli.
I'll
Yeah.
put it on the screen. And
Yes.
are you on Ravelry as well?
Yes, I'm on Ravelry as well. I've actually got one like free pattern on Ravelry for a 30 scarf. So this is made from like ice really bright neon because I wanted to wear this in the winter and it's really dark here. In the winter, it turns sunset is at 4 p.m. and I'm afraid of cars not seeing me. So I went and got some neon yarn. And this is from like a 30s inspired pattern. And it's just like a small reverse, a small scarf. It's got arrows, but it looks like the hazard signs at the back of like British vehicles, like ambulances and stuff. Yeah, so I've got a pattern for this one on my Ravelry. I'll give you the link later as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but obviously they were really into this kind of arrow stuff in the 1930s because this is also from a 30s pattern. Yeah, so this one is supposed to be tucked in. It doesn't have any ribbing. So on the bottom, they start with stockinette on smaller needles, and then you just go to larger needles. So it kind of rolls up a bit. You're supposed to tuck it into the skirt. And they ask you to do like crochet border around it, but I don't think that really helps a lot with the curling, so it still curls a bit. And it's also just got, crochet edging on the sleeves. But I think it does make it look a bit more polished because I think ribbing tends to be a bit more sporty.
That's so interesting. I
Mhm.
I don't think I've ever seen another sweater that calls for stockinette on a smaller needle in lieu of ribbing.
Yeah. So they start you on 2.25 needles, if I remember correctly. So you start on 2.25 doing stockinette for 3 inches, and then you change to 3.25 or 2.75. I'm not sure. Yeah, you change to the largest ones once you're here.
So that was somebody who hated ribbing. They
Yeah.
wanted to
And I
knit
have
full
seen people
machine
switch
ribbing.
it back to ribbing. Like I've seen like one or two on Ravelry where people just like, no, I want to do it as ribbing instead. And it does look different. I think it does look a bit more polished, Like imagine you like stick it into the
Right.
skirt. And it's got three lovely buttons on the back. These are just like modern buttons, but they also have you do some crochet loops here for the buttonholes.
Mhm.
So you do have like I'm not a crocheter. I only learned to do it for like the border. And I'm not a huge fan of crochet because it kind of hurts my hands a bit. Maybe I'm not doing it correctly.
Well, they
Yeah.
have ergonomic crochet hooks now. I have vintage
Mm,
crochet hooks that are very thin,
hmm
teensy, but I don't
mm.
do a lot of crocheting, so it doesn't hurt me.
Yeah. I just have to do them for the occasional border.
Yeah.
So yeah, so this is a 1930s pattern. I got this one from Etsy, I think. Is yeah.
Now, what's making the
Yeah.
different bands of color look so thick? Is there some like double layering going on there?
Not really. Let me show you. So it's similar to the pattern on the sea waves. So they've got you doing reverse stockinette on the green stripes, and then you do stockinette on the colored stripes. So there is a raised texture. It's a bit like ribbing. So that's how you, so on the back it looks like this.
Yeah, so
The
it's very
front it looks
thick.
like this. And it's knitted, the V is knitted like a V, and then you sew up the center. And you do like a triple decrease on the point on one row, and then like a normal decrease on the other row. And it turns out starts out from a strip, and then it just, becomes a V.
Got it.
Yeah. So it's also not very difficult to do, but you have to sew this into the body.
Uh,
And the instructions just say there's a small hole here. They just say to leave it, and I didn't sew it up either. So just sew this part into the sweater. Yeah.
it's cute if you're entertaining kids, you can poke something out that little hole. Surprise.
20%. Yeah. Yeah, I think people maybe sew it down, but I just couldn't be bothered. Like, it doesn't flip up anyway.
Some of these things, people who haven't knit from vintage patterns don't realize sometimes the assembling of the garment is
Yeah.
really a challenge because it's not like anything you've ever seen or done before.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and the instructions are very, very short, very, very short. They just say assemble,
Yeah.
sew up.
But what's interesting is that sometimes that assemble, when
Yeah.
you read the pattern, you think like, okay, I don't know what they're talking about. But then when you actually knit it, it sort of presents itself as
Yes.
only one way that you could do this. So
Yes, it starts making sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So the moral of the story is don't be afraid to try some unusual vintage pattern. It all
Mm,
comes together in the end. And if you're
yeah.
really struggling, just send me a message on YouTube. I'll try and look at the pattern and help you.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. And I've also, this is the first thing that I actually knitted. So this is with really thick yarn, worsted weight. And I haven't used yarn this thick ever since. So this one is like 20 stitches per 4 inches. And it's from a Victorian pattern for a sewn tag. So that's a shawl. And you wrap it around and you button to the back.
I'm
And
surprised
it's
that
very warm.
a Victorian pattern would have two tones and that really interesting texture.
On the Victorian pattern, the two tones is actually wants you to do fake ermine trim on the outer side. So it wants you to do it in white and then sew on little tails. But I didn't want to do that, obviously. So I just did a more modern, like two-tone. Yeah.
But the texture also looks, pretty contemporary.
It is. It's just a basket weave. Yeah. So this was pretty easy to knit, for one of the first projects. I actually did these on the long needles before I switched to the circulars for my other stuff. And I survived.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Good.
and this one is surprisingly warm during the winter because I think maybe just because it's worsted weight. Yeah, but I did have to redo the borders a few times before I got it right because I have to like decrease around the corners and kind of like do a few decreases around the corners and around the bends. And when I was first starting out, I wasn't sure how to calculate that. So
So oh, bless you. Is that
sorry.
applied afterwards or you're knitting
Yes.
that as
Yeah, you knit the dark colored part first and then you pick up stitches and then knit around. Yeah.
that also looks like a lot of work.
This
Deceptive.
is one of the quicker ones to make, maybe because of the yarn weight, but
Okay.
yeah, it's still a good amount of work. I think I've got maybe two more things left. So I've got a small accessory. This is just I made it out of the same yarn as the cardigan, and it's a 1940s pixie hood. It's so hot, but I'll kind of put it on too. Like, yeah, it just looks like this.
Oh, it's
It's two
very,
rectangles. I think it's one of the easier things I've made.
it's super cute.
Yeah, and it's got a fake rib, so the pattern tells you to, I think, slip every third stitch or slip every fourth stitch, and then I knit it every other row. So you've got kind of a ribbing effect going on here, but it's not actually ribbing. Let me find sorry, the last thing. The last thing is this funky pineapple purse. And it's also from a Victorian pattern. So I think it's from something by Lady Gauguin. I think it was from the 1840s, but they've got similar similar pineapple reticules up onto the Regency area. And you can just like I made this just so I could fit my phone into it.
And the beading. That,
Yes, I also added beads.
oh, it's just too adorable for words.
Yeah, I was like, sorry, I have to get this out.
And the tassels,
Beading along the top.
cords.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
and I made tassels. I made this out of Malabrigo silk, so it's 100% silk, so it's got a nice shiny luster to it. Yeah.
that must have
And it's
been
actually
fun.
made, yeah, it's knit like the leaves are knit in a pineapple pattern that they're also used on vintage patterns. So I also made one I think called the chevron jumper from Susan Crawford, but I don't have the jumper with me because I gave it to my mom. And it's the exact same pattern as the one on the leaves here.
It must have been so, so much fun to see those little, I don't know what you
Yeah.
call them, like points sort of arriving.
Yeah. These are the points are actually knit with the same pattern as the leaves, but it's offset by one stitch every row. And for some reason that turns them into points.
So three-dimensional.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
wow.
and I made this on like small, the small circulars that you use for socks, the ones with, the 3-inch tips. So I knitted all of these in the round.
I've
But
never knit
yeah,
with those. I don't own them. I probably should get a set.
if you can knit with DPNs, I think then you're fine because
Oh,
they're so short, they're a bit hard to hold. You don't
like
have enough
little
leverage.
beads, little
Yeah,
beads.
they're very small. Yeah, but
I
because
have
the entire
DPN.
thing was knit on 2.25 needles, I was like, I don't want to, knit this on DPNs. So I tried the circulars.
I have DPNs, but I almost never use them. I do magic
Yeah.
loop.
Oh yeah, I think that would be nice as well. I think the only time I use my DPN is when I need to do some I cords. Otherwise, I just don't use them a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, that's a pineapple.
Well, that's a great place to stop. That's just the icing on the cake. So cute.
Yeah, this pattern is also available for free online, so I'll give the link to you later as well. Yeah.
Good. All right, that's great. That would be great. Okay, so now my final wrap-up question is, please tell my audience someplace in your town that if they're
Mhm.
looking in a guidebook as a visitor, they won't find someplace that sort of like only known to the inside crowd.
Okay, so I'll give you a place from Taipei where I'm from. So for all you, fabric and yarners there, Taipei has a huge fabric market called Yongle 市场. So that's Yongle Fabric Market, Yongle. And it's located next to Beimen MRT station. So on the first floor is a traditional market that sells, fish and whatever. On the second floor is a fabric market. And on the third floor is a tailor's market. So if you want, you can buy fabric on the second floor and take it upstairs to get it tailored. And all around the market, there's also lots of stores selling haberdashery and yarn and everything that you could, think of. And it's one of the best places to go to if you like anything, to do with fabric and, fabric and textile crafts. And I'm not sure if they will be on guidebooks because I don't really see a lot of tourists there, but it is located at the edge of a tourist area. So it's located at the end of Dihua, which is like one of the old streets that, look the same since 100 years ago, and they sell traditional like Chinese medicine, and they sell like the things you need for Chinese New Year celebration. So they've got stuff like, bird's nest. If you want to like buy bird's nest or shark fin or that kind of thing, it's located right next to that street. And there's also like a very very big temple, the Chenghuang Miao, that you can pray to. They say it's one of the most, you know, what do they call it? Like one of the most effective. Yeah, but okay, I think it's worth a visit. A bit difficult to navigate because the inside is like a maze and there's maybe 100 stores, 200 stores. Like there's a lot of stores in there, but it's just a great place to, go in and get lost in.
Oh, it sounds amazing. It makes me want to go right to the airport and fly right over. Long
Yeah,
flight from New
yeah.
York. But I've been to Hong Kong, so maybe
Mhm.
someday. Go back.
Yeah, it's not that far away. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It is very hot though. Like I have to say, Taipei is really, really hot. Like it gets to 38 degrees Celsius in the summer. So probably avoid visiting during the summer if possible. Yeah.
Good tip.
Yeah.
Okay, and now in the UK, what's your pick?
Oh, I'm not sure how off the beaten path it is because I've only been living in Southampton for half a year. But I've been to a place called the National Motor Museum, and it's next to it. It's got an Victorian or an Edwardian building called Palace House. So that's the house of the owner of the museum, and he was like, an aristocrat who collected cars. But the house itself is also very nice, and I think it's decorated in a way that modern people will kind of appreciate a bit more. So it's not very it's a little bit, lighter in color, and I just found it a really nice place to visit. And when I wore this there, I took a few pictures there. Yeah.
Oh, fine, fine. Oh, that just sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Well, okay. This has been really fun. I never know because I haven't met a lot of my guests in person ahead of time. So
Yeah.
it's a home run when you get somebody who's so fascinating and brilliant and enthusiastic. So
Oh,
thank
that's
you.
still kind of you to say.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that expertise with us. And I
You're
wish you,
welcome. Yeah.
personally, I wish you a lot of success. How long before they bestow this degree on you?
I still have maybe 2 years, a year and a half to 2 years before I get the degree. Yeah. So I'm about halfway through.
Well, keep in touch with us. Keep us posted on how you're doing, and
Mhm.
I wish you much success with that.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely I will. I actually do have a YouTube channel, but I'm not very active on there. It's called Lawrence
yes.
Crafts. Yeah, so you just can put it up if people are looking for. Yeah.
Lawrence Craft, is that what you said?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
one word. Yeah. And I've done some documentaries about Chinese fashion, and it's all linked on the channel if people are interested. Yeah.
Very good. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you.
Oh,
Thanks so
see you. Thank
much.
you very much. Thank you, Billy, and your audience for
Okay.
listening to us ramble.
Bye.
Bye.